Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the future of digitalization. Thank you all for joining us today as we take a look at architecting for high availability and how to really take advantage of the mandatory migration in order to optimize your enterprise architecture. We always welcome your active participation in our events. We're now live via Zoom and LinkedIn Live. As the session is really for you, we want you to engage and interact with us. Please do use the Q&A functionality in Zoom or the chat function on LinkedIn and pose any questions that you'd like answered. We will be discussing these during and after the panel discussion. If you'd like to voice your question or points directly, please utilize the raise hand function available in Zoom only, and I'll promote you to the panel so that you can ask our experts live. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel Roberts, our host and moderator for today's session.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you for that intro, Carrie, Brian, and Tirat. I'm going to come to you in a moment. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you've got an amazing cup of coffee. My coffee today is sponsored by Hired Gun, which is a private coffee shop just up the road from where I live. And I believe it's a Costa Rican blend, and I'm loving it. I know it's too early for Brian to have coffee because he's in the UK and they drink tea. And Brian, you're from SUSE. What do you do at SUSE?
Yeah, good morning, Daniel. So I'm a pre-sales engineer in SUSE. So I've been in SUSE about, which is coming up on 4 years now. Prior to that, I spent far too long, frankly, at one of the major hardware vendors. But I've been moving towards open source for quite a while. So say with SUSE for 4 years now, and that absolutely is a coffee for me just to get me going this morning.
It is a little bit early in the UK. And the best thing about Brian, apart from working at SUSE, is he's also a Liverpool supporter. So get in there, the Reds. Tirat, you can see that you've lived through summer. When we look at Brian, he hasn't seen the sun in a while. Tirat, you're in Johannesburg, if I remember correctly.
It is correct. Thank you for
awesome. And what do you do for CoCre8?
Okay, so I am the senior solutions architect at CoCre8. So brand new at CoCre8. I'm just here about 3 months, but I've been doing solutions architect pre-sales for the good part of 15 years of my life. So been around.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. You know, this topic we discussed late last year. And the title hasn't changed. 2027 is closer than you think. And when I Googled SAP migration, I received 3.2 million hits. When I Googled application migrate from on-prem to cloud, it jumped to about 21 million hits. And the first page is all focused on strategy, top strategy, strategic decisions for cloud, the best checklist on your strategy, how to strategize for your strategy. The content is staggering, which says to me that people are still struggling with this. Clearly, this move is keeping people awake at night. It's keeping the CIO awake at night. It's keeping our architects awake at night. And more importantly, it's keeping our business users awake at night. The risks that are taken through these decisions as we jump through the hoops that need to be taken in order to modernize our architecture are staggering. And you know, it just brings me back to the phone has spoilt me. And Brian, I want to ask you, do these modernization projects have to be so hard?
Well, I guess the marketing answer is no, everything's great and easy and fantastic, that kind of stuff. From my perspective, there's a lot of change involved. There's a lot of things to worry about, a lot of things to take care of. And they can be sort of more simple, if you like, but it does require a lot of upfront planning, a lot of investigation, those kinds of aspects. So without those kinds of efforts, then yeah, I think they really can be quite challenging. But you can cover off all the bases beforehand, and with the best projects, you know, that's the way they work. Is that, you know, there's a lot of upfront planning work, a lot of testing, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, that builds to a plan where the final actual migration process is a lot more controlled and understood and comfortable for the business and the customer.
How significant is the strategy with regards to the methodology that people are using? How important is that? And do you subscribe to one, or do you say use whatever?
So from SUSE's standpoint, we're relatively ambivalent in that regard. So one of the things that where we kind of contribute, if you like, in terms of easing that process is that we work really, really hard to make sure that, so for people listening who don't know SUSE, we're an enterprise Linux company with a variety of different products, but we're primarily known for our operating system that underpins both enterprise applications and particularly SAP. And one of the things that we work really hard at is making sure that that experience that customers have running SAP on top of our platform is the same wherever you go. Okay. So whether it's on premises, whether it's in any of the major public clouds, the experience is the same because we do a lot of testing with those partners. And in fact, that partnership piece kind of plugs in with the open source thing. It's a really key component to the way SUSE operates. In terms of the fine-grained methodology, that's kind of beyond where we would normally be contributing, but we certainly plug in at the beginning stages.
Okay. So what SUSE wants to give it is almost a McDonald's experience. No matter where you go, the interface is the same when you're looking at that. One less thing for a DBA or a technical person to look at, because they know what they're getting when they're dealing with SUSE, and they can deal with these other components. I think that's a really nice way of looking at it. It's reducing the complexity when it comes to these changes.
Where we can, yes.
Go, Brian.
Yeah, I was going to say we do that where we can. There are some differences between particularly cloud platforms when you get into fine details, but we do what we can to manage those and actually to highlight them in terms of things like best practice documents and things like that.
Best practice documents. We're going to come to those as well. Tirat, you've gone into CoCre8 as a solutions architect or a solutions person. What is CoCre8's special space when it comes to these migrations? What do you do for customers?
Okay, so let me put in perspective. So CoCre8 is the Fujitsu representative for South Africa and English-speaking Africa. So we represent Fujitsu as a brand. From our point of view, how we make it simple is we've got, 40 years of knowledge and a relationship with SAP. So we understand how SAP works. We understand the SAP HANA and how we need to migrate over. We understand the complexity around just the migration point of view. So we've got that knowledge, we got the know-how, and we can assist customers in doing the migration and transformation smoothly. And we know it's a pain point. We understand the flex, and we understand the complexity, the cost. And it's a very difficult one for a lot of clients. I mean, it's a case where, if it's working, why move it? I mean, it's a risk factor. So we understand that risk. So that's where we come in from an infrastructure point of view, how we can do it for you.
Okay. Brian, sitting in England, closer to Europe than we are, why do you think, even though we're in 2022, there are still SAP clients who've not started their migration? What do you attribute this to?
So it's a really interesting question, especially coming from the UK, because we're particular. It seems that the UK is really quite far behind in terms of the general migration forward with SAP. And we've spoken to colleagues across Europe, and it seems to be that there's generally a level of hesitance inside the UK. But generally speaking, I think there's several aspects to it. So first of all, in terms of SAP migration, and I guess by the question you're alluding to the end of sort of ECC and NetWeaver support in 2027, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think there's a lot of frustration within customers that they've had that message in its earlier iteration when it was 2025. They've had that, really strongly impressed upon them by SAP. So there is a level of frustration within customers on that front. And certainly the English population, I think, are a little bit stubborn in that regard. They kind of, a little bit, we'll do it when we're ready kind of approach. But from a practical standpoint, I think that there's two things that go hand in hand. First one is the migration forward from the classical SAP architectures and implementations into Business Suite on HANA or the full S4 on HANA. That's quite a lot of change, particularly if you're going towards S4. There's a lot of business process change involved. So many customers have just kind of stuck their head in the sand a little bit, thinking that it's several years away and we'll get to that. Because we've had other pressures. We've had, certainly in the UK, we've had all of this Brexit fun, let's say. Everyone's had to deal with COVID pressures, those kinds of things. And I think that those kinds of things have stalled some projects. But we are starting now to see people recognize that time is not that far away, and that they need to move forward to remain on support with SAP. And there's a realization that it's probably wise not to leave it till the very last minute, because you can end up with the kind of typical end of project panic. So if it's left too late, you could end up with struggling to find partners that can help you go through that migration, because they're all busy doing other projects. And then if you do manage to find one, you might find that the prices and the cost of that exercise has gone up because they're in such demand. So they're the kind of risks that kind of pop up as you get closer towards that deadline. So there's certainly an awareness that our customers need to move forward with that now, and it's starting to kick off in the UK in a significant way. But there has been a lag.
Before I bring Tira to give us a local perspective, is it the same story with the other big ERP vendors in your region, Ryan? I know that there are others that are also saying you need to migrate to our cloud offerings, and are people digging in their heels there? Is the uptake kind of, it's the way of the world?
Well, certainly the bulk of the stuff that we see is around SAP. Similar to, as Tirat mentioned, SUSE has a long history with SAP. So that's the bulk of what we see. But I think that any change of ERP platform has a potentially large impact on the business. So there's a lot of hesitancy around care and attention about doing that. And certainly what we've seen is that a number of the migrations within the SAP world towards HANA or S4 are driven in conjunction with a move to public cloud. So that they're using that as a vehicle to help literally kill two birds with one stone. And again, the process behind all of that is not straightforward. So that kind of builds in a little bit of latency, if you like, in terms of the projects. But there is, of course, a general move towards public cloud infrastructures. But a lot of customers, really want to see the business case.
Okay, the business case becoming more and more important.
Yes.
Tirat, from a South African perspective, is that statement ringing true with you? We still have customers on SAP in South Africa who have not started their migration, or do you think that only applies to a bigger market? Our guys are on the way.
No, that statement is very true here in South Africa as well. We're seeing a lot of customers sitting on what we call SAP landscapes and have a plan at some point to move to HANA. But again, it comes back to what is the best option for the clients to move. I mean, and cloud is one of the buzzing words, but we know, and statistically, not everything is fit for cloud. Do realize that the cost of cloud versus cost of having your own infrastructure, and it comes down to my data sits in my data center. I can leave it here, I can manage it, whereas sitting in the cloud, what are my costs for that? There's a lot of pros and cons. Yes, there are some applications that's fit for cloud, and there are some that's not.
So that hybrid world is what people are stumbling on. Is that what people are stumbling on? Why they're not moving? I think we've kicked this one to the water now and understand. As I summarize it, the marketing says it's easy, but there's a lot of change management that needs to be done. From a Linux perspective, from a SUSE perspective, from a technology perspective, we want the same experience for our administrators, our architects, and our technology folk, no matter where they are on cloud or on-prem. We need to make it easier for them to migrate. And users are now frustrated because SAP's moved the date once or twice, what's saying it's not going to move again, but they don't want to be lost. And the strategy of a hybrid strategy is just a reality now, and people are stumbling around the strategy. If you had to give us a 10-point check before moving out of strategy into the world.
I think we lost Daniel. Okay, so I think while Daniel comes back on, he speaks about 10-point check. That's something that is relevant. In anyone who's got SAP landscapes or to move to HANA, you need to do a few bit of things before it happens. Hi, Daniel, welcome back.
That was very rude. I was in the middle of my summary and about to ask a question there. I apologize for that.
Well, I got to the point of it. You asked a 10-point check, and
brilliant.
Absolutely. So as I was saying, a migration exercise has to be pre-planned. I think Brian mentioned it earlier on as well, that you need to have some form of information at hand before you start any exercise. Like, I'm going to move. And it's not a simple, migrate over and let's hope for the best type of thing, or migrate over and it should work. Those are uncertainties. And that is another reason where we see there's like a kind of stumble, is how do I move it over with the least amount of disruptions? And back in the day, we would say, let's run a parallel system in place and we hope it works. It's not the case anymore. You cannot run two parallel systems. I don't think infrastructure allows it these days. So what we do as CoCre8 Fujitsu is we have kind of tools that will tell you, and it will give you plans in place on how to migrate, what to migrate, and it will even help us with analysis. And it's something we do.
Okay.
And that is the approach we should follow when moving applications from wherever it is, maybe traditional landscapes to HANA. Even if you want to move some of the workloads to cloud, we can tell you, okay, whether it's cloud ready or not cloud ready, whether it's fit for cloud or not fit for cloud, it's something we can help with. And
so break out your architecture into areas where it fits before making those decisions is a logical thing. How many people do that?
To be honest, not that many, because it comes at a cost, unfortunately. So if you look at it from a different standpoint, either you take the cost of HANA, going to move to HANA immediately and take that big cost, or invest a little bit and let us do some form of assessment and see where we are to where we need to be. And like I said, this comes back to the information and the trend analysis we have globally with SAP. So we know what to look out for. And that planning tool will tell you, okay, so we need to move, whatever the case may be, how do we move it? And you find that infrastructure may not even be fit for HANA. So we need to look at that point of view. So it looks at the performance matrix. We can pick up bottlenecks. So if you have current performance issue, current bottlenecks, we'll get to the root cause of that. Come out of this assessment.
Okay. Brian, do you want to add in anything there before I throw you a curveball?
Yeah, sure. I suppose it really plugs into something Tirat mentioned earlier, which is cloud migration as a vehicle to assist an SAP migration. I would absolutely agree with Tirat to say that cloud isn't the answer for everybody. We've certainly got customers who've evolved their SAP landscapes but they've absolutely stayed as on-premises customers, on-premises infrastructure, because it suits their business. In particular, there's a UK manufacturing company. They're probably a globally known brand that build, if I said digging equipment, that might help a little bit, but they're a manufacturing company fundamentally. And they've been through that process, and they're very much an on-premises customer, and they're staying that way. They're putting some small tiny bits out into public cloud, but their core infrastructure is remaining on premises because it suits their model.
Yeah, I see that. About 5 years ago, we had a cloud strategy, and then we moved in about 3 years ago where we had a hybrid strategy, and now we've just got a strategy, and I think that's outstanding. I think that's where we need to be, because there is solutions for lots of people. Which brings me into a couple of questions that we've got piling up. The first one, I think, is an SAP specific question. And this is from Anonymous. I really don't enjoy Anonymous questions. Give me your name, for goodness sakes. But our IT leaders have adopted a wait and see with regards to migration. Perhaps SAP will extend the deadline again. It will require us to move on to a new system, which will disrupt business and process. I think both Brian, you and Tirat were saying that. How can I rely on the importance of acting now? I think we've answered that by saying, you got to judge it. Hey? I mean, you got to make the decision for yourself, but you don't want to leave it too late. Brian, you shared some wisdom on the scarcity of resources that might come through. You think we've answered that okay? Can we move that one off and feel like kicking that one?
I would say so. I mean, just to round it out, I would say that there's a significant risk of increasing the business costs the later you leave it, because the migration process is likely to be harder to support. And I think with SAP having extended the deadline once, I think they're quite unlikely to extend it further. They really want to get everybody into the new HANA and S4 world. So I think, if some customers will dig their heels in and will not move, but they're going to end up in a position where they have to buy, extended support from SAP, which will be costly to the business. So why not invest that cost up front to move to a newer infrastructure?
Then we've got a question for you, Tirat. It's from Sipo Bengu on LinkedIn. Actually, we are cross-streaming today, so we've got multiple platforms. And Mr. Bengu says, the question is, how cost-effective is cloud storage for small, micro, medium enterprises? Wow, he fits into all the categories that are not large. And how do SMMEs get access to cloud services? So first of all, Sipa, I think your question is a good one for all enterprises. But Tirat, if you want to answer just quickly, but I don't think it's an SAP migration question.
No, it's fine. So yes, we can help you with that migration to cloud, or we can put you into a cloud services model. But it also depends on what you want to put in cloud. I mean, if it's a small scale, fair enough, we can definitely look at that. But I mean,
so just reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we can discuss it. But I mean, that's definitely doable.
Okay, and then Amit Paul has asked quite an interesting question. How do you think it's gone here. How do you think the digital industry will be in 5 years? Amit, maybe you want to clarify, what do you want to know about that? I mean, Brian, you can have a stab at that, but that's about philosophizing whether you're going to catch a trout in the dam, I think.
Little bit of a crystal ball question, I guess. I suppose the world seems to be inevitably moving more towards, say, cloud deployment models, but we also see customers coming back to on-premises deployments. So it's kind of hard to get. Predicting the future, isn't it? Yeah, perhaps a little bit more specific would be good to talk around. But we see different approaches, to be honest.
Okay, I agree with that, and we actually have facilitated a session with Fujitsu on that. about where workloads need to be and how do you judge that. So go back on the chief site, look at Rocket, and you'll be able to download some interesting wisdom about how do we decide where your workloads sit. Then Sibusiso Ledwaba has asked an interesting question, made a statement. Sibusiso is saying we've delayed our migration journey because of the dearth or the lack of appropriate skills within our organization. And how do we bridge that gap? So this is not a CoCre8 to go and sell to them or a SUSE to sell to them. How do we educate our IT team? And what do you think are the top 3 sources for education? Tirat, do you want to take that first and then we'll let Brian go?
Sure. So the thing is, we've seen skills is becoming a problem. There's a lack of skills in every industry. The only thing I can say is, if I don't sell CoCre8 is, well, if I do, put it that way, is we've got the skills. I mean, we can help when this is what we are here for, to assist the clients in moving forward. And some of our tools is vendor agnostic. So we'll definitely assist you. But from I mean, I can't say much. I mean, if SAP uses their own skills to do migration.
That's not what I asked you, Tirat. Where can we go and educate our IT team? Where would you suggest? Where do you self-educate on these things?
Well, we use education houses to educate, but I mean, and we.
And you got any podcasts or reading that you recommend? I'm going to give you a minute because it is an unfair question at this place. Brian, where do you suggest people go and educate their IT teams? And is there anything that any reading materials or lessons learned that they can go through and get education within their teams?
Yeah, 2 second aside, I would suggest that that challenge is generic. We do see that often, and one of the key advices from certainly our region SAP director is to engage partners to help you with that migration, to support your internal teams. But that doesn't mean that you don't need the internal training as well, to come to the question. Okay. So in terms of how and where to get it, I think some useful sources are things like the SAP blog, again, publicly available. There are thousands of articles in the SAP blog that go into a variety of different topics and cover a lot of different areas. So it does take a little bit of digging through to find out. But that's a good place to look for, sort of generic SAP things. There's also the Open SAP platform, which includes some training for people. So that jumps to my mind because I know that there's, for example, there's free training around SUSE Linux on there. That kind of thing.
So there is
they're useful places.
Go, Tirat. Do you want to add anything to that?
I didn't think of that. Fujitsu's got blogs. They've got actually YouTube videos as well that can help you.
Yeah.
But mainly blogs and white papers, which is published publicly.
Awesome. So the message out there is there's a lot of information. I mean, 21 million hits just on migrations. There's a lot there. Coming to that, Lauren Elizabeth Appleton has asked, how do we identify and select the right migration strategy for our organization? How big is your cup of coffee, Lauren? Let me ask Tirat to take that. Tirat, how do you advise people on the right migration strategy for what are your top 3 tips? Let's not go into an MBA for it.
Okay, top 3 tips. First, let's identify what you want to migrate. What is your key burning point? What is the application that's troubling you at the moment? And then get a plan around how we're going to migrate that. And there's many ways of doing that. I think that would be my main tip, is to identify what it is that you want to migrate. And yeah, obviously then there's many different forms of migration. And with appetite, it has to be with what you want to do. Do you still want to keep it on-prem? Do you want to do a hybrid model? And we can obviously then dig into where the risk stands. But the main being is migrate what you have to.
Okay, so I've popped down, identify the top application which is burning, then make a selection of where you want it. So an architectural review of where it is, what is the code? I mean, that goes into lots. What is your technical debt? Where is it going in the business strategy? All of those things. and then potentially identify a team for this?
Okay, not with you on team.
Would that be anywhere in there?
Not really. I mean, once we identify what it is, what you want to do with it, then there's a plan.
Awesome.
If there's no plan in place, that's where we will carry on staying on where we are today.
Cool. Michael has asked a tough question, which I'm going to send to Brian, because I'm never going to bump into you in the passages and you're not going to hit me in the knees for this one. As a provider of Azure, where SAP and Microsoft have collaborated strongly, how do we compete with SAP Cloud and RISE, which is a counter this strategy? Is there a market for SAP on Azure? Whoa, that's a tough question. I'm going to let Brian take a stab at that.
That is indeed a tough question, and thank you for sending that one in. First of all, I would agree. I would say you're in a pretty good place, actually. Certainly in terms of what we see in the UK market, Azure is probably the preferred platform for SAP. Again, largely down to that agreement between SAP and Microsoft. What I am aware of is that yes, RISE has come along in the last 12 months or so, which provides a kind of a pre-canned kind of approach. But I think that there's still lots of customers who don't want to go all the way as far as SAP as a service kind of thing. They want to run their own infrastructures. They want to control it. They want to have that flexibility. And as a result, that they want to deploy their own infrastructure, which could be on premises, as we've discussed, or in the cloud. And Azure certainly seems to be the most popular place right now for SAP deployments. The majority of what I see lands in Azure. And I think that the other thing that goes along with that is that SAP and Microsoft put a great deal of money into that agreement that they made a few years back. I mean, a great deal of money into that collaboration. So that means that I don't think that SAP on Azure or even public cloud generally is going to disappear anytime soon.
Okay.
I think RISE is just a vehicle to try and accelerate the thing we've mentioned. The lack of customers not moving forward. I think they're trying to accelerate that with RISE.
Okay. Do you want to add anything to that, Turat?
No, absolutely. I agree with Brian. I think the reason that has come about is because we've seen the non-uptake in moving everything to HANA at this point in time. So, and that is why SAP's moved the date from 2025 to 2027. Whether it makes business sense to move to the cloud, and that's something I can't answer, but it is an option. But I mean, we support all hyperscalers, so it irrespective from our point of view, which way you want to move future data. But Brian is right in saying they are clients or customers that really, really wants to still own the data on-prem, and it's more of a data locality point of view. We'll still see this, and I've seen this, that a lot of clients want to still hold on to the data in their own data center, and I think security comes to the forefront of these questions. They feel that, I'm in a public cloud or I'm in a hyperscaler cloud, and security for me is key. And then this is why I think a lot of on-prem solutions are still seen.
And also just the manufacturing works better on-prem in some cases, it's just a choice. Larry's asked me a question on LinkedIn, which is, he makes a statement, which I quite like. As you know, migration is a big move, which involves lots of programs, and data migration, which is often ignored, needs to have extensive knowledge of the data that they are migrating, but it comes across as expensive. When it comes to data upload, etc., it can be costly. So how is automation helping this? Another left field question. I'm going to throw it to you again, Brian, and then you can talk around it, because I don't want to get into robotics. I'm excited about robotics and automation. And acceptable is not the realm of this discussion. But if you want to dive into it, either of you, data migration on the side.
The only comment I'd make on this actually is, because I probably will discreetly punt this one over to Tirat. But what I would say is that yes, it can be moving your data around is the hard part, and the expensive
Sure.
part.
Sure.
What it brings to my mind actually is more around the question of getting stuff into clouds is one thing, getting it out that's where the costs lie, and that's where the challenges are. So I would actually link that to probably later in the conversation around, you know, cloud versus on-prem and what's right, because once you've gone there, you know, putting your data in is difficult and expensive. Getting it out, much more so. So that's the issue. So
okay.
Yeah.
So we haven't touched on automation yet, but I like what you've said there. This is not something to be taken lightly. Tirat?
Yeah. Okay. So to be honest, automation is not something that we've seen in CoCre8, but the technology supports it. You know, that's where we're moving to digital transformation, and IoT and big data comes to the forefront. But I mean that like I said, it's part and parcel of digital transformation. And I agree with Brian. You know, if you got to migrate, you know, you got to start early enough and do it in like chunks to migrate instead of doing it at the last minute. And then you're just migrating everything over to sake of migrating to beat the timeline. And that's when you find issues. You're going to be sitting days and nights fixing more than working.
Please, can we not use our expensive consultants to clean data? Let's automate that. Please, 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 can we not use our expensive consultants? Turn my camera off because it sits in my throat so much. Where would you suggest? So if we look at SUSE and we look at the Fujitsu team, we understand it's from an infrastructure perspective. We also understand its integration perspective. So with that blanket in mind, if you had to do a project health check, what are the top 3 areas that you would radiate to, Tirat? Where would you start your health check?
So I would start on, well, basically SAP HANA. I would start at the worst case scenario. So we look at and I'm sure it's like if you look at ERP, for example, that would be the core of what SAP would have. And we would look at that. We would look at what's the standpoint. We would look at where the issues are. If it's working, fair enough. We would look at the analytics of, can we move it, migration path. We would then look at the infrastructure itself. Are you ready? Is the infrastructure compatible to HANA? If not, let us make recommendations. And we've got tool sets. Okay, well, apart from that, we use a fine balance between persistent memory these days. So we want to save money, or save you money from just buying expensive infrastructure and keep moving along. And say, okay, what is the most optimized infrastructure you would need to move these sets of applications, SAP applications, SAP ERP systems, and obviously HANA. If you want to keep it on landscape, for now, we will give you that plan, say, okay, you can leave it here, but your migration part will be easier in the future, should you do these few things. That's where we start.
And for yourself, Brian, same question. If you had to go into a project as part of a team that's looking at the application layer, the middleware layer, the infrastructure, database, and transactional, even the bus, where would you focus your health check? And what are the top 3 things you would be looking for?
Cool. So I think the key thing for me was the very beginning of your question, when you go into a team. So we kind of pulled on this before. The mantra of our SAP Alliance Director is engage your partners early, because they can plug into that team and bring experience and highlight things that customers need to consider, as you know, even right at the beginning of the project. So bring those issues out to the fore straight away, just to avoid, you know, falling down holes later on or making more work than you need. So that's a key thing for us. In terms of other pieces of the project, I mean, there's probably, you know, some steps before that around, you know, understanding business case and, you know, the value that you're going to get from this. You know, what are you actually looking to achieve? You know, customers don't want to move to HANA or S4 just because of the time frame. There's usually some benefit to be had. There should be some benefit to have for the business, but that's kind of pre all of that. But it's other things that we've come across over time are things like take the opportunity to do cleanup. Clean up the data that you've got. Don't migrate stuff that's old and out of date. They archive out all of the old stuff that you don't need. So it helps.
So you would check, as a health check, you would look at the state of what migrating.
Yes.
And
I think the interfaces into the system are all of those still needed. Yeah. All of those, those it's plumbing into SAP. You still need all of that, because whatever you can do to get rid of, and again, you mentioned the words earlier on, technical debt is great, because that really is the mud that holds companies back. Is they often have a lot of technical debt that they need to deal with and manage, and it holds companies back from evolving. So taking the opportunity to get rid of that is a useful thing, I think.
So if we're going to do this, do the digital transformation at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Do some update and refresh. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Tirat, you wanted to add something to that as well?
No, Brian's hit it on the nail. I mean, we can't migrate, like to say, garbage in, garbage out type of thing. So we got to clean up the data. Absolutely. It's one of the key areas.
So irrespective of our strategy going forward, we are going to store data somewhere. And Simpiwe Zuma has said it's a known fact, cloud storage is important to any business. How do we maximize the value? And I'd like to add to this, Tirat, so I can ask you, how do we maximize the value between cloud storage and on-prem in a hybrid world? What do you look for to maximize that value?
Okay, so in an ideal world, we recommend that if you're having archive data, maybe that might be a good candidate to move into a cloud. We generally look at DR, and the clients would then probably back up to DR and hold the backup in DR. So cloud backup might be a good contender for just that.
Okay.
Production data, we still see it sitting at the heart of where the system sits. So data close to your infrastructure, and it's easily coverable if you need to. And then that is kind of the approach we would look at in a hybrid state. That choose your archives and move that into cloud. I mean, you can do that quite easily instead of having a secondary site just for archives. Okay.
So basically, you got to get the architecture right, aligned to the business process, and then you can make Mazuma's question come to life. What do we store in cloud? What do we need for rapid access? And what do we purge and take away? That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Brian, do these projects ever end? I mean, by definition, if we call it a project, it has to have a start and an end date. How do you suggest ExCos deal with these migrations? What is your advice to them?
I would certainly suggest not to underestimate the length of time it takes. There is a lot of tooling, there is a lot of work to do. I'm just literally coming from experience with some of the customers I work with. So there's a different global manufacturing company that's close to where I live. They're in the retail business, or actually consumer goods business. They've gone through an on-premises to cloud migration, and they're essentially doing just a lift and shift. But the size of their organization is so huge that they've been at it for a couple of years. So, and they're still working through that. Another example is there's a supermarket based not too far from here that I've worked with. Again, they've moved forward with SAP. In fact, it was a greenfield for them in the cloud, and that's a couple of years worth of efforts to get them in there. Can they end? Yes, they need to end. I think at some point you've got to switch away from the older things that you had, whatever they are, because otherwise, as I said before, it just becomes like technical debt that you drag along. I did work with another UK supermarket a few years back, who did, and again, it's kind of slightly different, but it's relevant. They had a mainframe that they ran their business from. And they, again, this is a few years back, and they said, okay, well, we're going to refresh, and they went to it actually wasn't SAP, actually it was an Oracle suite, so Oracle eBiz across the board, ERP, and they went to it was actually a commercial Unix platform to do that. Huge investment, massive project, couple of years on that. Got everything going, but there were still bits and pieces that were left behind on the mainframe. Even at the point where they were at the next step and going off the Unix machines to the next generation of their infrastructure, they were still, had some bits and pieces that were on the mainframe, and that's again, it's just mud that holds you back from evolving. So I'd think do what you can to have closure on those older systems, to just either upgrade, migrate, or decommission it where possible, to drive that closure point. But we've had other customers as well who've had simpler things to do. I've worked with a global drinks manufacturer in the UK who've implemented SAP Enterprise Warehouse, and that was based on top of HANA. So that, if anyone doesn't realize this, anything that uses HANA requires Linux underneath. It's the only platform it runs on. And these guys used SAP, but they were a Windows house. So they did use, classical SAP, but all on Windows and SQL Server. So when they moved to EWM, that was a big change for them. But that's 12 months down the line. That's been fairly compartmentalized as a project. And that's now in production, managing their warehouse. So it can be done.
It can be done. Awesome. Tirat, a question for you. From a SAP perspective, we all went cloud. We're going onto cloud. Everything's going. Are you seeing workloads migrating back on-prem? And what does that do to the overall cloud strategy, which I said 3 minutes ago now is just a strategy and going back again?
Yeah, I've only seen it once where migrations from cloud back to on-prem has happened, and due to if you plan correctly, you know what the cloud costs are going to be. But I mean, at some point you'll see your cloud costs as go higher and higher and higher, and it'll escalate quickly when you start consuming more and more services. So it comes down to planning, and yeah, so that's the bottom line. But I mean, I've not seen so many move to cloud the other way from that kind of perspective as well.
Okay, interesting. So everyone is getting to grips with where things are going. So if I had to ask you for a SAP HANA migration, for kicking off the architecture of where it's going, make sure it's successful, what would you say are the 3 roles that are indispensable to a team of this nature from your experience, Tirat?
So if I would say the 3 roles would be are you looking at which people we
yes, if we had a selected team, Dr. Donnie Craven, who, if you know anything about rugby, used to say, give me 2 locks and I'll give you a rugby team. What are my 2 locks, or 3, the flank forwards for a migration of this nature?
Yes, yeah, answer this correctly. So you would look at the application owner first. If it answers your question, because he understands the application, and I'll say why we look at him first. And Brian did allude a little bit to this in the previous question. We want to understand how much of customization has happened on SAP, but that can potentially be the one length of time to migrate over. I mean, if you're going to migrate a customized SAP application, that'll take you long. And we've seen this. I mean, there's a retail client we've worked with. It took them 2 years to move a customized application over to new platform. So we start there. Wow. It takes long because you can't just move a customized application from a landscape to S/4HANA. It's a problem. Secondly, we would definitely, like Brian also said, we would talk to CXOs. The project timelines are not as simple as they tend to believe. Oh no, we'll move it in 6 months. It's not the case. So that is something we would have to then look at. those are my two, main.
Those are your two. Brian, same question. What are your three indispensable roles?
I suppose I would have to pull. I mean, I would certainly agree with Tirat. You know, the application owner is going to be key, or application owners are going to be key in terms of understanding both what's required to run the application and also its impact into the business, and then that linkage into the business in terms of when is the best time to move it. A classic example, you know, you wouldn't want to remove a retail application bang in front of Christmas, for example. You're about to hit your peak load. I mean, that one's obvious, but you know that relationship will be kind of key in terms of understanding how things will work. I'm going to suggest that project management is going to be really important.
Okay.
You're going to keep grip on the whole thing, and the parties involved, and understanding again what needs to be achieved by when. So I think that project management piece is going to be really key. Yeah. And then, as we've kind of hinted at through all of this, is that whoever's coordinating that relationship with your partners. So bringing those close to your team. So literally having a virtual team to assist with that migration. So that linkage out to your partners is going to be really important in terms of having somebody in your organization that maintains and manages that link to keep it fresh.
Awesome. I really like that. Guys, we're coming to the time where it's time of wrap up and advice for the period going forward. Brian, as our guest from Over the Waters, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing IT teams over the next 6 months? And what is your advice to dealing with this challenge?
So over the next 6 months or so, I guess, to be honest, I think over the next 6 months, it's probably the same as it's been for some time, which is that IT teams face this challenge of balancing, keeping the lights on and running the business and evolving, because you kind of need to do that evolution piece. If you don't evolve, then you stagnate, and then eventually your competitors will overcome you. I'm very fond of quoting Darwin from 200 years ago, wherever it was, is that it's actually not the strongest that survive, it's the most adaptable. So building in adaptability and adapting to change is really hard, but that's something that I think teams should look at. So I guess my suggestion is consider new ways of working. So again, in the open source arena, there's lots of innovation, there's lots of change that does happen just as part of the community. And of course, SUSE focuses that into certain areas. But what I've learned from it is it's that rate of change, and it's kind of shone a spotlight on a few companies that I've worked with where it's been, this is the way we've always done it. And they try to maintain that going forward. And that mindset, while it's perfectly applicable for the moment, it doesn't help you in 2 years' time when someone else is doing something new, different, faster, more innovative, more exciting to customers, cheaper, all of the good stuff. So I would basically just say embrace change. It's one of the few things we can guarantee in life. So embrace change, look at new ways of working, because it can, in addition to help the business, it can actually reinvigorate your job.
Excellent. Excellent. And slow down this great resignation, which I think is a necessity, especially for us in South Africa. So Tira, coming back from a local flavor, when you look at your successful clients, what are they doing to speed up the migration and mitigate that risk of change that you want to leave with our audience? What's the bit of advice you've got for them?
Absolutely. So modernization is what comes. I think we got to do things differently as well. What I've seen in success rate is you start early. We don't wait for when things come up or when problems come up, or when we need to change at the last minute, and then try and make a big project out of it and quickly do it and rush it. It's where we see a lot of problems come up, gremlins, say. But I mean, if we start early enough, and like Brian said, let's do things differently, and we will definitely get to a higher success rate.
Excellent. I really like that. Guys, this has been a very interesting chat, and I want to thank you for spending some time with us. We've had some good questions from the audience, even from our LinkedIn audience. We want to thank you for that. I'm going to summarize what I've heard over the last 55 minutes, and that is, don't wait. It ain't going anywhere. Stop fearing it and rather get on with what needs to be done, because there's opportunities to change your business, to modernize and take advantage of what was maybe implemented a long time ago, and reviewing the chart of accounts, reviewing the outputs, reviewing the reports. That only happens when you've got a buffer of time, or else, as Brian and Tirat, you've both said, you inherit something in a panic. And panics don't necessarily work the most optimally. So for you who haven't embraced your SAP upgrade, reach out to both CoCre8 and to the SUSE teams from an interface and architecture and an integration perspective. They may have nuggets and tools that you haven't heard of, and also rely on your partners who are doing your migration to introduce you to these folk. Brian and Tirat, can our audience link with you on LinkedIn? Are you open to that? Do you use the platform?
Absolutely, and looking forward to interact with them. Yeah.
Brilliant. Reach out to them. I expect them to be inundated with good questions. If we haven't answered your question sufficiently, just drop Carrie or myself a line and we'll get more answers to you. But from my side, Daniel Robus, thank you for letting me host today's session. I'm going to hand back to Carrie with 2 minutes to spare.
Well, thanks again, guys, for attending today. I really hope that you found today's session insightful and that we answered your questions.